All right, so we are back again. We are going to redo the Star Wars The Clone Wars review. I tried to make the video over the weekend, and for whatever reason, don't know what happened, but the audio was cut out for like the first 30 minutes of the video. I didn't realize it till afterwards. And again, for whatever reason, the audio picked up the last 20 minutes of it. So I don't know what happened. Don't know what's going on. But hey, the good news is we get to talk about Star Wars all over again. And so we're going to go back over everything and we'll see how it turns out. Maybe it took me about an hour. Took me about an hour the last time, but we'll see what happens this time around. So, going back over Star Wars The Clone Wars once again, and hopefully the audio will be better this time. So, this is a video that I've been wanting to make for a while, and I've had a number of different ideas rolling around in my head. I've been thinking about it for about a year, and I have been saving it specifically for roughly this time of year. I wanted to release it closer to May the 4th or on May the 4th because Star Wars Day. And that's similar to what I did last year. And if you go back and you want to check out my past videos where I did a ranking of all the live action Star Wars movies from worst to best, you can go back and check out that video. We're not going to be going back over that today. I will be referencing the live action movies to some extent in this video because it's all canon, it's all connected together, but I'm not going to be going back over that ranking. If you want to hear my ranking, you can go back and listen to it from my video from last year. And so today we're mostly just going to be talking about Star Wars The Clone Wars. We're not going to be talking about Rebels in depth or any of the secondary media surrounding the Star Wars franchise. It's going to specifically be about Star Wars The Clone Wars, the show from Cartoon Network, the one that they brought back a number of years ago to finish it off. So that's primarily what we're going to be focusing on. And I can't remember if I spoke of this last time, just more broadly when it comes to the Star Wars universe. When you compare Star Wars to other great, well known movie franchises like Transformers, you can compare it to the MCU, you can compare it to Jurassic Park, you can compare it to Indiana Jones. Even though Star Wars, in terms of scale, is not as successful, let's say, as the MCU. The MCU, what they have been able to do is probably never going to be replicated again. The fact that they could make that many movies that are part of cohesive universe and continuously include and add brand new characters and add them into the story, and then we see them in individual solo movies, and then we see them all together in these massive blockbuster movies. I don't think anything like that is going to ever happen again. And so the consistency that Marvel has had when it comes to releasing movies, even Star Wars has not been able to surpass it. And so the MCU has made a ton of money, all the money. But in terms of an idea, I've always given the creative edge to Star Wars over the MCU, and I'll explain why. Not to take away anything from what the directors, producers, actors have done with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's truly a great accomplishment. Probably nobody will ever be able to accomplish anything close to that. So, not to take anything away from them, but what you have to realize is that they are pulling from 70 to 80 years worth of source material. They have all of these comics that have been written over the years, over the decades. Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, all these famous guys that have just given them an unlimited amount of content. And while they still have to kind of piece it all together, it's they still have all of that information. They still have all of those resources. Now, it's very hard to take a comic book and copy paste it panel for panel into a live action movie. So, what you kind of see is an amalgamation of a number of different prominent story arcs. If you're a fan of the comics, if you know some of the comics, then you realize that, okay, it's not 100% comic accurate, but some of the primary ideas and principles are in place and they kind of throw them all together and mix them all together and boom, you have the MCU. And so because of that, I've always given the creative edge to Star Wars, because the original trilogy that was created by George Lucas and Lucasfilm, that was the original piece of content. It preceded everything else. Everything else that we have gotten to enjoy within the Star Wars franchise has come after the original trilogy. It was the original idea. All of the live action shows, all of the video games, all of the animated shows, even the comic books, they all came after. The movies preceded the secondary content that has grown and exploded into a much larger thing. And so the fact that they were able to just come up with this universe on the fly, and I know it's not entirely on the fly. I'm sure George Lucas thought of a lot of these things for years before they actually made the movie, but they were thinking of things as they went. Like they had to come up with the content. They had to figure out the canon. They had to make sure everything made sense. They were doing a lot of this on the fly, and that to me is very very impressive. I will always give the creative tip of the cap to Star Wars over pretty much everything else because the movies were the original idea. And it was the movies that gave birth to all of the other secondary media that we get to enjoy today. But when it comes to Star Wars The Clone Wars, they faced a different problem. Their problem was not how do we come up with an original idea in an original universe with original characters. That wasn't the problem that they had. The creators of Star Wars The Clone Wars, John Favreau, Dave Filoni, all those guys, all the people that helped out, the actors, they had to sit down and they asked themselves the question, how do we create a story or a collection of stories? How do we create compelling characters when their stories have been thoroughly explained and the characters have been thoroughly explored? Because if you've watched the live action movies, then we know a lot of the details. We know what happens to a lot of these prominent characters. We know who Anakin Skywalker is. We know that he's the chosen one. We know where he comes from. We know that he was the hero of the Clone Wars. We know what happened to him. We know that he falls to the dark side. We know he becomes Darth Vader. We know that he has Luke and Leia. We know that he has a secret marriage with Padme. We know all of these things. We know who Obi-Wan is. We know who Qui-Gon Jinn is. We know who Master Yoda is. We know what happens to all of those characters. We know where they come from. We know how they die. We know what happens to the clone troopers. We know who Luke Skywalker is. We know who Leia is. We know that Darth Vader turns back to the light side at the very last moment to save the universe and destroy the Emperor. We know what happens to the Jedi Council. We know what happens to the Jedi Order. We know all of these things. And if you're a fan of the Star Wars comics, then you know even more than that. It's just a ton of content. And all of these things have been, almost all of these characters have been explored in depth in some form of media. And so, again, they ask themselves the question, how do we create a compelling set of stories with compelling characters when all of these things are known? And not only do they create a compelling story, not only do they create compelling characters, Star Wars The Clone Wars is impossibly good. It is impossibly good. Given everything that we already know about the characters, they are able to accomplish something that's truly great. In the history of media, there has never been a secondary piece of media that has added more to the already established franchise than Star Wars The Clone Wars. Other franchises have tried. We know that Marvel has added live action shows and animated shows into the canon of the MCU. We saw this initially with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. that took place years back. That was intertwined with the universe. It was canon with the universe, but it just doesn't live up. The reason why Star Wars The Clone Wars is so great is not only does it give you more background and context to all of the characters and all the stories, it adds so much to the universe. There's so much information. There's so many things going on behind the scenes. And there's a lot of information that you don't get in the live action films that once you sit down and you watch Star Wars The Clone Wars, you finally go, oh, like that makes a lot more sense. And so, and not only that, there's also a lot of surprises along the way. There are a lot of interesting dynamics. There's a lot of interesting moral dynamics that take place in the show, some of which we will talk about here in a moment. And me and my brother, we watched this show as it was coming out every Friday night years back. I mean, that was the highlight, right? That was the our favorite show. That was like the best show we've ever seen, and we would look forward to it every single week. Recently, we went back. Me and my wife had started watching it from the very first episode. We started with the hour and a half movie, the intro movie, and then we just finished season 1. And so since me and my brother would sit down and watch it every Friday night, I haven't actually gone back and watched it from start to finish. So we're kind of in the middle of that right now, and it's just great. It's just great, and it's very nostalgic for me. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. It's my favorite animated show of all time. Not only is my favorite, I just think it in terms of quality, when you consider the storytelling, the animation, the context, like all the things that it adds to the Star Wars universe, it's the best animated show that I have ever seen. And so we're going to be going into detail about that today. And I think it's only fair to talk about first Anakin Skywalker. He is the central character of the Star Wars universe. He is the hinge on which the entire story swings. For those of you that believe that Luke Skywalker is the chosen one, Luke Skywalker is the chosen one, he's not. Anakin Skywalker is the main character, and not only main character in terms of focus, he's the main character because he's an awesome, awesome character. He's an awesome individual, and so it's only fair that we start with him. Now, I want to break down Anakin's character with 3 levels of development. And the first level I want to talk about, and this is the greatness of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, is that it gives you a lot of information and context. I want to talk about Anakin's development as a warrior and a lightsaber duelist, and how it is displayed, how that growth is displayed in the show. Now, if you've watched the live action movies, you do have a little bit of context to Anakin's power level. If you remember at the end of episode 2, Attack of the Clones, Anakin and Obi-Wan fight Count Dooku, and Count Dooku just totally wipes the floor with him. It's really no contest. And then it fast forward to the beginning of episode 3. Anakin and Obi-Wan face Count Dooku once more, and Anakin says something like, "My powers have doubled since the last time we met." Now, while we get to see that on display, we really don't get a lot of information as to how this happened. We don't really get to see any character development or growth in terms of his power level. It all happens off screen. What Star Wars: The Clone Wars offers is a visual representation of Anakin's growth as a lightsaber duelist and as a warrior, and it's very, very cool. And what the writers did, is very smart. They used every single battle with Count Dooku as a way of gauging and expressing to the audience how powerful Anakin was becoming. And so throughout the Star Wars: The Clone Wars show, there are 5 or 6 different instances where Obi-Wan and Anakin fight Count Dooku, and each time you see a substantial growth in Anakin's abilities. So the first time they fight at the end of episode 2, they get totally demolished. I mean, it's not even really a fight. Count Dooku dispatches of them very quickly. Anakin loses an arm, and they would both have been killed if it wasn't for Master Yoda showing up at the very last second and saving them. So that was the first time they fought. The second time Anakin and Obi-Wan fight Count Dooku, it's still not really close at all. Count Dooku still obviously has the upper hand, and Anakin and Obi-Wan, they're not going to instantly get themselves killed, but they're also nowhere close to the level of Count Dooku. The third time they fight Count Dooku, they're starting to get a little bit better. They still really have no hope of winning. Count Dooku isn't going to lose to them, but you can see that they're making progress. Okay. The fourth time that Anakin and Obi-Wan fight Count Dooku, the gap is starting to close. Now you begin to see Count Dooku is getting older, he's getting slower, Anakin is becoming more powerful with the Force, he's becoming a better lightsaber duelist, and now it's about even. Anakin and Obi-Wan together equal Count Dooku. Neither one is going to get the upper hand. One's not going to definitively defeat the other. And so it's very, very close. They have closed the gap in skill. The fifth time Anakin and Obi-Wan fight Count Dooku, it becomes obvious very quickly that if something does not happen, if somebody does not intervene, if there's not some kind of distraction, that Anakin is going to straight up murder Count Dooku because that's how powerful he is, and that's eventually what happens. You fast forward to the beginning of episode 3, Anakin defeats Count Dooku quite easily. And so now it's not, well, they get beat instantly and now my powers have doubled and he takes out Count Dooku. Now we have a reference. Now we have the ability to go back and gauge just how powerful Anakin is. And we gauge how powerful Anakin is by his conflicts with Count Dooku. Every single time he takes a jump, single time his skill increases. And all of that is on display for the fans to observe. The second the second way we're going to the second way we're going to observe the evolution of Anakin is his genius as a strategic mastermind. And at the beginning of the Clone Wars, nobody really knows who Anakin is. He's somewhat of an unknown. A lot of people know who Obi-Wan is, and so Anakin by proximity is also known, but people don't really understand the kind of person that they are dealing with. He's a young Jedi Padawan, he's a young Jedi Knight. He's not as infamous throughout the galaxy as he eventually becomes. And so, if they're facing Obi-Wan and Anakin, they're like, yeah, we know who Obi-Wan is. And then there's this young, kind of irresponsible, he's skilled and talented, but he's irresponsible and he's reckless. And so we're not really worried about him. Obi-Wan is really the one that we're worried about. But by the time the Clone Wars ends and Anakin has gone through all of these various evolutions, not only does he become a brilliant strategic mastermind, everybody knows exactly who he is and exactly what they're getting themselves into. Whenever they look across the battlefield and they see Anakin standing there, they say to themselves, we might as well call our wives and children now and tell them we're not making it home because that guy is a total psychopath and his Padawan is a total psychopath. And then Obi-Wan will stand off to the side and trash talk you while Anakin and Ahsoka beat you into the ground. You know exactly what you're getting yourself into when you look across the battlefield and you see Anakin Skywalker standing there. And so he is able to kind of morph his recklessness and his irresponsibility into this very unorthodox and win at all costs kind of mindset. And he just dominates everybody on every single level. He becomes one of the best duelists in the universe. He's the best starfighter pilot in the galaxy, brilliant strategic mastermind, outsmarts everybody. I mean, it's unbelievable. And you get to see that progression over time. It's not just, oh, he's a Padawan in episode 2 Attack of the Clones and then he's like this brilliant warrior in every way, shape, and form in episode 3. Now we have context. Now we have information. Now we have background. Now we understand that it has taken a long time for him to get from point A to point B. I think the Clone Wars is like 8 or 9 years. And so that progression happens gradually and it happens at an understandable pace. It happens at a reasonable pace. And so that is the information. That's the background context that Star Wars The Clone Wars offers. The third level of progression that we measure Anakin by is his fall to the dark side. Now, the live action movies do try to explain this, and there are a lot of aspects to Anakin's character where you can kind of see, oh, I understand why he fell to the dark side. But at the end of the day, you realize that the live action movies, when you're talking about the prequel trilogy, you're really only left with 6.5 to 7 hours of content. And while they do their best to try and explain Anakin's reasoning for falling to the dark side, there's still some information that we are lacking. I mean, he goes from being the hero of the Clone Wars to straight up destroying the Jedi Order all within the span of an hour and a half. And you're like, geez, that happened. It seemed like overnight he went from being a boss, a total boss, like a hero, and now he's just straight up the villain in every way, shape, and form. And so it happens very rapidly, happens very quickly. And so we need a little bit more. We need a little bit more context. And what we get is we understand that it's not just that he thinks the Jedi are hypocrites. It's not just he wants to save his wife. Those are really the two primary motivators, but those are really the two primary motivators behind him becoming a Sith Lord. We understand that it's a lot of different things. We understand that he gets worn down, not physically from the war, but he gets worn down morally. He gets worn down psychologically by the war. And so what Anakin's point is that he loves Obi-Wan and he appreciates the Jedi Order and the power that it has given him and the ability to help others because I think, Anakin truly wanted to help others in the beginning. That was something he actually wanted to do and he appreciates those aspects of the Jedi Order, but he also realizes that because they've been placed in the war as soldiers, they've totally been taken out of their element. And so the Jedi Code is actually stopping them from doing what is necessary to win the war. And Anakin's point is, well, if you just let me cut loose a little bit if we don't have to adhere to this strict code, we could end everything, right? We could stop the death, we could stop the war, we could stop the suffering. And he's actually proven right by this because once Order 66 takes place, once he turns to the dark side, he actually dispatches of both the Republic and the Trade Federation very quickly. I mean, that's essentially the latter half of Revenge of the Sith is that he turns to the dark side, the clones join the empire rises from the ashes of the war, and he dispatches of both sides. He eliminates all the leaders of the Trade Federation in like an instant. And so he's proven right that this whole time we've kind of just been taking our sweet time. We're not willing to do what's necessary. And so to him, that is immoral. To him, it needs to happen swiftly. To him, they could have ended the war a long time ago, but they don't. And another reason for his fall to the dark side is that he is not treated very well by the Jedi Council, and by extension, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, and we'll talk more about Ahsoka here in a few minutes. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan are not treated well because of Anakin. And it's really crazy because it's obvious by the end of the show that Anakin, but more specifically the trio of Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka, they are obviously the heroes of the Clone Wars. They are obviously the heroes of the entire war, but they never get the recognition they deserve. They never get the support that they deserve. And they're kind of outcasts. They're kind of the black sheep of the Jedi Order. They're tolerated, but they're not necessarily accepted. And I would contend that if the Jedi Order and the Jedi Council had taken a little bit more interest in Anakin's development, he never would have fallen to the dark side in the first place. They totally dropped the ball. They totally left him hang out to dry. The only person that was really there to guide him was Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan was trying to hold everything together. And so it was a mix of being worn down morally and psychologically. He wanted to save Padme. He felt like the Jedi were not competent enough. He also had a deep desire for power that he kind of had to suppress in his younger years, but then, he couldn't control it anymore, so he joins the dark side. And so all of these things kind of come together, and you begin to understand that it wasn't just something that happened overnight. There was a lot of small things that happened over time. The Jedi Council falsely accuses his Padawan Ahsoka of murdering somebody and casts her out of the Jedi Order. You could also make the argument that if Ahsoka was around with Anakin directly during Order 66 and the fall of the Jedi and his fall to the dark side, that he might have not even fallen to the dark side in the first place if he was there to have that support. And so all of these small things start to build up over time, and you realize that this was not just a spontaneous decision. This is something that took place over 8 or 9 years of a very long and brutal war, which Anakin had suffered through the entire time. And so when you take all of that into context, what you're left with is just an awesome character, a flawed character. That's the point of Anakin. It's the fallen Messiah, dark Messiah stereotype, but it's really well done. It's really well done. They explain Anakin very well. You start to understand what drives him. You start to understand some of the finer details of his character. And it's also kind of cool. This is not necessarily related to the Clone Wars, but Hayden Christensen, who's the guy that played Anakin Skywalker in the live action films, initially he got a lot of hate for his portrayal. But I think once people saw the Clone Wars, I think that kind of made them realize that Anakin is a great character. And not only is Anakin a great character, Hayden Christensen's portrayal, we actually love it, right? And there is a video of Hayden Christensen. He went to a Star Wars celebration and he sat down for this interview and he got like the standing ovation from people because people finally realized, hey, we kind of took some of this for granted. We're stuck with the sequel trilogy now, and we took Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor in the prequel trilogy for granted. And so it was very cool to see him get his flowers. And then Star Wars: The Clone Wars just comes along and adds so much more to the character. It's a great balance. It's canon. It's all the same character. It's all the same story, and so it thoroughly explains Anakin's development as a character, and that's why. But really, the biggest reason why the show works so well. Secondly, we need to talk about Obi-Wan. Now, Obi-Wan, I can't say that there is the same kind of growth in his character. His character does grow in a number of different ways, but I'm saying it's not quite. It's a different kind of contrast between him and Anakin. And Obi-Wan, the whole point of Obi-Wan is that Obi-Wan is consistent father figure. I know that the movies more so portray them as brothers, but he is the consistent father figure in the show and in the Star Wars universe. Obi-Wan is a very underrated character. He often gets overlooked. Not only in the show, he's overlooked by the Jedi Council and the Jedi Order, but he's also overlooked by the fans because, and also overlooked in terms of being a warrior. Obi-Wan, while he is not as physically gifted and talented as Anakin is, he is a very underrated individual when it comes to lightsaber dueling and when it comes to using the Force. Now, he has his moments where he just he gets beat, as do all of the main characters. But when he gets serious and when he stops cracking jokes and he actually takes the conflict seriously, you realize that he is actually a very competent person. And not only is he competent in terms of his physical skills, he's also competent with his mind. He's a thinker. He's called the negotiator. And you see this play out time and time again where he's constantly outsmarting the enemy. He's constantly outsmarting those around him, and so he has this very interesting balance of calmness and level-headedness, along with being able to outthink and outsmart everybody. And then also he's very good as a duelist and very underrated as a duelist and as a force user as well. And there are some developments in his character, like you start to understand by the end of the Clone Wars that he actually suspects that there's something more going on between Anakin and Padme. I think he actually kind of knows that they're together as an official couple, but he does not say anything about it because he knows that's what makes Anakin happy. There's really nothing else that makes Anakin truly happy outside of his relationship with Obi-Wan and his relationship with Padme. Those are really the two things, and his relationship with Ahsoka. Those relationships are really the only thing that he has. Everything else is just kind of a distraction. Everything else is just kind of painful for him because of his background. And so Obi-Wan kind of looked the other way because he loved him, right? He loved him like a brother and he wanted to see him happy, and Padme brought him the most happiness. And Obi-Wan, he sits on the Jedi Council. Again, he's very underrated. People take him for granted. He is one of the heroes of the Clone Wars. He gets to become a father figure to Anakin and to Ahsoka as well. It's kind of funny that you watch this dynamic play out where Anakin is this irresponsible, somewhat disobedient young Padawan, and Obi-Wan has to kind of rein him in. Well, then Anakin becomes a Jedi Knight and has a Padawan of his own, and Ahsoka does the same thing to him. I mean, Anakin's trying to rein in Ahsoka, Obi-Wan's trying to rein in both of them, and you can see between the banter that they have that Obi-Wan's enjoying this a lot. He's enjoying the fact that all of Anakin's disobedience and craziness has kind of come back to bite him in the rear end in the form of a Padawan that is also reckless and dangerous. And so the dynamic between the three of them is great. The banter between the three of them is great. It's comical. I enjoy it. And so Obi-Wan is kind of the consistent. He's just such a consistent character. And he's not a boring character. He's just a consistent character. And Star Wars: The Clone Wars, you see that in the live action films, but you also see it throughout the show as well. Ahsoka. So I don't know whose idea it was initially in terms of the creators of the show, but the idea to give Anakin a Padawan is an amazing creative choice. It is an unbelievably great creative decision. Ahsoka not only becomes one of the best characters in the entire show, she becomes one of my favorite characters in the entire Star Wars franchise. And somewhat similar to what I mentioned before, she challenges Anakin in a way that Anakin challenged Obi-Wan. And we see in a number of different ways that it was actually good for Anakin to have a Padawan where now he is the father figure, right? Now he's the responsible one, along with it being a smart creative decision on behalf of the creators of the show. It was also very smart. I know I just said that the Jedi Council kind of failed Anakin, but the choice to give him a Padawan was actually a very smart idea. And Master Yoda actually says something like this at the beginning of the show when Ahsoka is introduced. Yoda is explaining that this is for Anakin. This Anakin needs this. He needs to learn not only to be responsible, not only to be a father figure, not only to train up the next generation, he also needs to learn how to let go. That's Anakin's entire problem. He holds on to the past. He holds on to anger. He holds on to hate. He holds on to all of these emotions for far too long, and it ends up kind of destroying him. And so the introduction of this Padawan was supposed to help him let go. Either she grows to become a warrior of her own and she survives, or she doesn't make it through the war. And either way, he kind of has to learn the lesson that he can't save everybody. He can't. He's not powerful enough to do everything, and he's going to have to let go of that relationship. Now, Ahsoka does not die in the Clone Wars. She lives, and she ends up becoming actually also somewhat underrated, one of the most powerful Force users in the galaxy because she ends up becoming somewhat of this gray Jedi. She's not a Sith. She's not a Jedi. She's kind of like this neutral Force user, and she's very powerful. And the reason why Ahsoka's character is great is really every reason why Rey from the sequel trilogy is not great at all. Rey is horrible. Rey is a horrible character, and it's not because and people say, well, you just don't like you just don't like female leads, right? You don't like it that a woman is the face of Star Wars. It has nothing to do with that. The point is that Rey kind of shows up out of nowhere, literally out of nowhere, and is great at everything. She's the ultimate Mary Sue. There's no training, there's no background, there's no context, there is nothing. There's no honing of her skills, there's no background in dueling or force abilities or anything like that. She just picks up a lightsaber and she's dueling Kylo Ren one on one. It's like, how is she surviving? And they write it into the movies that she's actually, oh well, she's the granddaughter of Palpatine, and that's how she has all these powers. I don't believe that. I don't believe that was the original creative decision. I believe they wrote that in there to cover their rear ends for their creative mistake. That was never the plan. That was never the idea. She was never meant to be Palpatine's granddaughter. She was truly just meant to be a nobody. That was the entire point. It wasn't a good point, but that was the point. She was totally meant to be just a nobody, but that was not acceptable. It's not an acceptable creative decision. So they had to write in that she was actually Palpatine's granddaughter, and it just ends up all kind of being garbage. As it's not that it's Daisy Ridley. It's not that it's a woman, the face of the Star Wars franchise. It has nothing to do with that. It's the fact that the character is not good. Ahsoka's character is great for all the reasons that Rey's character is not great because we actually see 8 or 9 years worth of development. And so when you see Ahsoka survive Order 66, survive a duel with Darth Vader, and she becomes a very powerful Force user, it all makes sense because you have the context, because you have the background. We understand the reason why I can believe that Ahsoka survives Order 66 is because she is trained by the Chosen One. She's trained by Anakin. She's trained by Obi-Wan. She's trained by numerous different Jedi. And that's what's kind of cool about season 1 is they have all of these missions where they go on adventures with different Jedi Masters, and all of these Jedi Masters are trying to train Ahsoka. They're all trying to teach Ahsoka something different. They're all Jedi, but they all kind of have different outlooks. They all have different philosophies, and they're trying to educate her. They're trying to teach her. They're trying to help her become a better person. They're trying to help her become a better warrior. And so you have all this context, not to also forget, and this is kind of a side plot, and I'm not going to go into great detail about it, but there is this story arc in season 3 or season 4 where they go to this secret planet of Mortis. Now, Anakin was the chosen one, and he was meant to bring balance to the Force. It turns out that the balance of the Force actually is a physical location, and by is embodied by three beings. There's some religious symbolism in there where the Father, he is like the father of the Force. He controls the light side and the dark side, which are embodied by the Son and the daughter. The Son is the embodiment of the dark side. The daughter is the embodiment of the light side. They're always at conflict, and the Father has to hold them in check. The way that Anakin brings balance to the Force is that when the Father dies, Anakin is the only one powerful enough to hold both the son and the daughter in check, thus bringing balance to the Force. Now, a bunch of different things happen. The son tries to overthrow, the father ends up dying, the son ends up dying, and the daughter ends up dying. So, the balance in the Force is reintroduced by default. And so Anakin doesn't have to stay and control the son and the daughter. The balance is retained by default because all of those characters die. And so the light side daughter, again, who is the body embodiment of the light side of the Force, she dies, but with her final act, she gives her life force to Ahsoka. So because Ahsoka, we she dies, right? She dies in that story arc, but she's brought back to life by the life force of the daughter. And so she literally is embodied with the light side of the force. Ahsoka kind of becomes the embodiment of the light side of the force. And so she kind of becomes this powerful character, more powerful than she otherwise would have if that didn't happen. And so when you take that into context, you take into context her training, you take into context her experience, and that she was trained by Anakin, and she's the embodiment of the light side of the Force, it makes total sense. It makes total sense. Yeah, of course she survived Order 66. Yeah, of course she fought Darth Vader. Of course she did all the different things. Of course she survived. Why? Because there's all of this background context. There's all of this storytelling that is added to her character. And so she is a character that slowly develops into this very powerful individual. It's not like Ray, who just shows up, overnight and is great at everything. That's not interesting. That's not cool. There's no background. There's no context for it. And it doesn't make a lot of sense. And so Ahsoka is 10 times the character that Ray is because she has 10 times the structure. There's 10 times the story. The backstory is 10x that of Ray. And so it really shows you where they went right and where Star Wars went wrong after that point. And so I have not watched really any Star Wars Rebels consistently. And I know they brought Ahsoka into live action. They made a live action series of Ahsoka's character, which is also canon. It's the same character, it's the same story. I haven't really watched any of that, but whatever they want to do with the character, it makes sense to me because we have all the information about what happened in the Clone Wars. The the Jedi. So the overall consensus is basically that the Jedi suck at everything. And they do kind of suck at everything, but I do think that there is some justification in that. See, the whole point of the Jedi and really what became their downfall was that the Jedi were never meant to be soldiers. They were meant to be peacekeepers. They operated independently. They were third party, right? They didn't have any affiliation. They were not part of any army. They were not soldiers. Well, the war got so bad and the scale of it was so big that they kind of had to pick a side. But their Jedi code did not allow them to go far enough to win the war. And this was Anakin's eventual critique, is that the Jedi would not go far enough to win the war. And this ultimately leads Anakin astray. This is why he's tempted by the dark side, because the dark side offered him the power to actually put an end to all of those things. And so it's not really their fault. They're taken out of their original philosophy of being peacekeepers, and they are thrust into this large battle where they have to make these very questionable decisions that could possibly go against their Jedi code, and so they're often held back by that. But I will say that a lot of the characters, a lot of the Jedi that are introduced are pretty cool. There are numerous different adventures where there's different Jedi that are introduced, and you kind of get to see their different philosophies. You get to see their different levels of power, and all of that is really cool. Every once in a while, and this is one reason why the Clone Wars is such a great show. The central story focuses on Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka, but every once in a while, out of the blue, out of nowhere, it will just throw you to a random part of the universe where there's a Jedi doing something totally obscure and random, and you're just like, oh, well, here's a random adventure with a character that you've never seen before, just to give you a break from the original characters, and that's really cool. It gives you a little bit of diversity with that. And so, even though the Jedi kind of ultimately fail in a lot of different ways, it's still cool to see them. I guess you would say, I don't know if you would say it was the peak of their powers, but back when it was still around, the Jedi Order was still around, and they were still functioning in all of these different areas of the galaxy. And it is kind of crazy that they were not able to figure out that Palpatine was a Sith Lord and that the clones would ultimately be their demise. It's like Palpatine is literally right there. You guys aren't getting any weird vibes. You guys aren't sensing anything. Doesn't really make a lot of sense, but ultimately they realize too late. And so the Senate is against them. The clones are against them. Palpatine's against them. Anakin's against them, and they really had no shot. So, and it is kind of sad because they build up all these characters and then they just kind of get wiped out at the end of Revenge of the Sith. The villains. Now, I am not a huge fan. There are really Let me think here. There are really 3 core villains. There's other villains as well. There's like side villains, but the 3 main villains of the Clone Wars is Darth Maul, General Grievous, and Count Dooku. Now, Darth Sidious is still around and he's still present, but he doesn't really do a lot of uh, physical work. A lot of it is just him pulling the strings behind the scenes. Like, you know that he's the villain, you know that he's the bad guy, but he doesn't really do a whole lot. Now, there is one episode, and I'll tell you about it here in a few minutes. It's one of my favorite episodes ever. But Maul, Grievous, and Dooku, those are really the central three. You know, you have Ventress. Ventress is a cool side character, but they kind of let her go, right? She kind of just shows back up after a season or two, it seems like, and she's a bounty hunter now, where she was more prominent earlier on in the early seasons. But Darth Maul, I am not a huge fan of bringing characters back from the dead simply to bring them back from the dead. I mean, if you're running out of creative ideas, it kind of lessens the stakes of all the things that have happened before if you're just bringing back dead characters all the time. But I will say they do bring him back and they do it really, really well. And his character actually becomes one of the more important characters towards the end of the Clone Wars. And so he's very driven by hate of Obi-Wan. That's really his primary driver through most of it. But Darth Maul turns out to be one of the only people that fully understand, or at least partially understand, what's going on. He understands that everything is about to change. He understands that the Jedi are getting ready to be wiped out. He understands that there's a new power coming. He understands that Anakin has been in the crosshairs of Palpatine this whole time. Palpatine is trying to lure him to the dark side. He sees all of these things, and that's actually what something similar to what he says towards the end of the show, where he says that I he orchestrated the Mandalorian War to attract the attention of Anakin, so that way Anakin could come there and he could destroy him, right? Which I think Anakin probably would have mopped the floor with Darth Maul. But Darth Maul is trying to spare himself and the universe this ultimate evil by stopping Darth Vader and thus partially stopping Darth Sidious as well, because Darth Sidious kind of just left him hung out to dry. And so Darth Maul he comes back, he has his brother, he has his apprentice Savage, and so all of that stuff fighting with Obi-Wan is cool. Darth Maul towards the end is becomes increasingly more and more interesting as a character when he's not just like an insane revenge-seeking monster. When he actually becomes somewhat of like a thinker and he's like, okay, I see what's going on. That's when he really becomes a really cool character. General Grievous. Now, General Grievous is kind of underwhelming in the Clone Wars. If you want a better idea of what General Grievous was supposed to be, I would encourage you to go check out the short animated series, The Clone Wars from the early 2000s. It's a very condensed version of the Clone Wars show. And it's not, I'm not even sure if it's canon, but that version of General Grievous is like 10 feet tall and he's like a Jedi killing machine. And he's actually pretty cool. In the Clone Wars, he kind of serves his purpose, but he's not really that interesting. He always has to rig everything in his favor. Everything, all the odds have to be in his favor. Everything has to go his way, and if he doesn't, he just runs away. That's kind of his character. And so there's a lot of retreating. He's kind of a coward, and there are a couple instances where he gets to do some cool things, but he's basically just a functionary of Count Dooku. He's the leader of the droid army, but ultimately he's kind of a coward. You really don't get to see him just be a total boss like you do maybe in the comics or in the earlier Clone Wars show that I talked about before. But he's still kind of cool. I mean, he has his moments. The 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 best, and I would say one of the most underrated characters in all of Star Wars is Count Dooku. Count Dooku's character, not only is he known as the best duelist in or one of the best duelists in the galaxy, not only is he known as the fallen Jedi, but he's also a politician. And if you were to ask me, would you rather have Emperor Palpatine in charge or would you rather have Count Dooku in charge? I would pick Count Dooku 6 times a week and twice on Sunday because Count Dooku is actually somewhat reasonable. Now, his methods are dark and he himself becomes somewhat of an evil character, but his reasoning behind all these things, he thinks a lot like Anakin actually. He understands that the Jedi, while their initial idea of the Jedi are good, he does not see them as willing to go far enough to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. And so he's a fallen Jedi, and he's a diplomat. He It makes total sense if you had to pick a character, somebody he's the only one that knows that. Palpatine is Darth Sidious. He's the only one that knows that he is the one pulling the strings behind both sides of the Clone Wars, the Trade Federation and the Republic. He's the only one that has insight to all of this. And so, if there was anybody capable of overthrowing and actually becoming a decent leader of the galaxy, it was Count Dooku. Now, he ultimately never gets that choice because he's defeated by Anakin, but he is one of the most interesting characters in the entire show and in the Star Wars universe, and also because Christopher Lee is awesome. Christopher Lee in the live action movies plays Count Dooku, and he's awesome, and so it's obviously not Christopher Lee in the show, but they still kind of capture they still kind of capture that same kind of essence. And so Count Dooku, he actually gets to do lightsaber duels. He's not like Darth Sidious hiding in the shadows. He is kind of controlling things behind the scenes, but he actually isn't afraid to get his hands dirty. And so he'll go here and fight these people and do all these different things. And he is consistently displayed as one of the most powerful force users in the galaxy, which is accurate because that's exactly who he is and who he should be. Now, Darth Sidious, like I said, he's kind of behind the scenes pulling the strings. There really isn't a lot to mention. I will mention again that one episode that I was talking about earlier. But Palpatine, I do wish they gave him a little bit more to actually physically do. I wish he would have more secret missions of his own. But he kind of fills his role. He's in the background. He's in the background manipulating everybody. There is there's a comment that I heard one time, and I apologize that I do not remember where this came from or who said it. I want to give them credit, but I don't remember. It's been a long time. But basically, what they said was that Darth Vader slash Anakin Skywalker is a perfect compilation of all of Darth Sidious's prior apprentices. All of the qualities that made those apprentices great villains, they are all combined to create the ultimate villain in Darth Vader. And Darth Vader is the ultimate villain of Star Wars and is also one of the greatest villains in all of pop culture. And so Darth Maul represents Darth Vader emotionally, the desire for revenge, the rage that drives him. The he Darth Maul is very controlled, is very much controlled by his emotions, and that's exactly who Darth Vader is. General Grievous represents the mechanical monster that Darth Vader ultimately becomes. After his battle in Mustafar, he loses his legs, he loses an arm, and he becomes this, I don't even really want to say lesser version of himself, but he becomes half man, half cyborg, right? And that's why Darth Vader is such a boss, is because he is just like this mechanical machine that never stops, and he becomes the best Jedi killer in the entire galaxy because he is this unstoppable cyborg monster, and it's similar to that of General Grievous. Now, Darth Vader is far more competent than General Grievous, but it is forward looking to ultimately what Darth Vader would become. Count Dooku represents the diplomatic part of Darth Vader. He also represents Darth Vader's knowledge of the Force and his ability as a duelist. Darth Vader is one of the best duelists in the entire galaxy. Darth Vader again is one of the best Jedi killers in the entire galaxy. He can fight multiple people at the same time, similar to what Count Dooku could do. And so all of those apprentices are reflections of what Anakin Skywalker would ultimately become in Darth Vader. Darth Maul represents Darth Vader emotionally. General Grievous represents Darth Vader physically, and then Count Dooku represents Darth Vader in terms of his knowledge of the Force and his abilities with a lightsaber. So again, I apologize whoever made that comment, whoever made those comparisons. I apologize. It's a great comment. I think I had to throw that in there because it sheds some light on the reasoning behind those characters. Everything that Darth Sidious was looking for, all of the traits. There were certain traits in all of his apprentices that attracted him, but there are also a lot of flaws. Anakin is Darth Vader's kind of like this flawless compilation of all of them, and he's the ultimate monster. He's the ultimate villain because of that. The clones. Now, in the again, part of the failure of the live action movies was that you don't get a lot of background for the clones, right? They're all just kind of copy paste. That's the point. They're all clone troopers. They're all mirror images of each other, and you really don't get very much diversity in terms of temperament and personality and things like that. The Clone Wars actually shows you that there is a wide variety of different opinions. There's a wide variety of different philosophies. There's a wide variety of different personalities and temperaments that you can find within the ranks of the clone trooper army. And Rex is great. Rex is not in the live action films. Commander Cody is. Rex is, I've heard people say that he's also the emotional anchor of the show. He's awesome. He's an extremely competent character. He is the perfect, he is the like the perfect sidekick for Anakin and Ahsoka, and he does his job well. He is one of the best characters in the entire show. He's the best clone character in the entire show. But you also see, and this goes back to what I was some kind of saying earlier, is that there's a lot of moral complexity within the show. And sometimes you're watching this like, how could they put this on Cartoon Network? You have people getting killed, people losing limbs, people getting their head cut off, all these different things. But not only that, it was the morality of the show. It actually made you stop and think. Now, it was still understandable to teenagers or to kids, but they threw in some very deep moral conflicts. And part of the conflict was that you had clone troopers, most of them served wholeheartedly for the Republic, but you also see that there were some who were fed up with the war. You had deserters, you had traitors, you had clone troopers that wanted to be free, and so they betrayed the Republic in order to gain freedom. They didn't believe, right? And here's the moral complexity: they didn't believe it was right for them to be created just so they can go and die in droves for a republic that they didn't sign up. They didn't ask to be created just so they could go fight in a war. That doesn't really seem fair to them. And so that's an interesting concept. How ethical is it to create a bunch of clone troopers, which are actually, they're individuals, they're clones of one another, but they're individuals. How ethical is it to create thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of individuals just to make them into cannon fodder for this large scale war? That's an interesting ethical question. That's an interesting ethical dilemma. And so all of that is posed by the development of the clone troopers. Now, you also get to see other things explored, like the whole conspiracy. They kind of figure out that there's a chip in their head. They all, they're afraid that they try and figure out what it actually means. And does it mean that they'll betray the Jedi? They never actually fully figure out the mystery or solve the mystery. But you start to see that there are flashes of what is to come. And so when you take all these things into consideration and you see all of these different clone trooper characters die and sacrifice and fight side by side with the Jedi, when they actually do commit Order 66, it's pretty gut wrenching. I mean, it's sad because now you have all this context like, man, like I actually like that clone trooper. I actually like that character. And now it makes it very painful when you have to watch them betray their friends, betray the Jedi, and especially with Rex, right? Because Rex, you see that it causes him a great deal of pain. Like he can't help but try to kill Ahsoka, but you see that he doesn't want to, but he's compelled to by the secret microchip, right? They're all basically sleeper cells for the Empire. Now Ahsoka rescues him by removing the chip, and so he returns to his old self, and Rex actually survives, along with a couple other storm clone troopers. But it makes their fall that much greater when you watch the Clone Wars and actually see the individuality on display numerous times over and over again. And so it gives the clones a lot of background. As for the best episodes and stories, best story arcs, there's one story arc where the clones are trapped on this planet with the four-armed Jedi that has the dual double-bladed lightsabers. And so he basically secedes from the Republic. He wants to become Count Dooku's new apprentice, and the clones have to figure out a way of stopping this super powerful Jedi. That's really cool. It's like 4 episodes. The end of season 3 or 4, I think it is, where Ahsoka gets captured by the bounty hunters and she's placed on this hunting planet and is hunted with other Jedi younglings. That's really cool. Anything going on with Camino, the various different battles happen on Camino. There's one episode where there's a clone commando. He comes out of hiding basically and remembers who he is and saves this droid force that is trying to gain information. That's really cool. A lot of the stuff with Darth Maul is great. The episode that I was referring to earlier with Darth Sidious, there is one episode. A lot of the stuff that goes on Mandalore is really cool. Earlier on, and then at the end, we'll get to the end in just a second. There was one episode. Darth Maul has successfully overthrown the Mandalorian government and the radical Mandalorian group known as Death Watch. He won it in a trial by combat, reference to Game of Thrones there, and he has kind of built his own little army, right? Well, Darth Sidious is like, "Well, I don't I think that you're trying to build all this to overthrow me." And so Darth Sidious actually goes himself. He shows up himself and he fights Darth Maul and Savage Opress at the same time. He fights them both at the same time. It's awesome. It's awesome. It's like a 5 or 6 minute fight. I've gone back and watched it dozens of times. I'll be sitting on my couch eating something, and I'll be like, I don't know what to watch, and I'll be like, you know what? Let's go watch Darth Sidious defeat Darth Maul and Savage Opress again for like the 30th time, and it's great every single time I watch it. The fact that Darth Sidious actually goes out and does something is awesome, but the duels are just unbelievable. The animation is unbelievable. The fact that they brought and so just a little backstory to them bringing back the show. The show got canceled on Cartoon Network before they actually were done with it. They were releasing storyboards of unfinished episodes, episodes that were partially animated, and so over the years there was a lot of steam that was built up within the fandom. Like, hey, like you guys just can't leave us on a cliffhanger, right? You guys can't just leave us not knowing what actually happened with all these things, and so they bring everybody back, and they bring everybody back, they bring all the voice actors back, and they finish it off better. They made the show better. It's very hard to do. They made the show better than it was before by how they finished it off. And so if you watch the end of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, the last 2 or 3 episodes, and then you watch the beginning of Revenge of the Sith, you realize that those all the things that are happening, they are all intertwined. The final episodes of Star Wars: The Clone Wars take place right in the same timeline of the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. Or the end, I should say, of Revenge of the Sith, where Order 66 happens. Now, it mostly follows Ahsoka. The guts to say, we're going to bring everybody back and we're going to finish off the show not with Anakin. We're not focusing on Anakin. We're not focusing on Obi-Wan, focusing on Ahsoka. The guts to do that is it's crazy, and it's also crazy how good it is. It's unbelievably good. Now, there was this other show on Cartoon Network. It was called Young Justice, and it was basically the Justice League, except it was the younger team, right? It was Robin and it was Aqualad and Superboy, and they were this covert team. That was a very good show. It was one of my favorite shows on Cartoon Network. They made 2 seasons of it and then it got canceled. And there was so much outcry from the fans that they were like, okay, well, we need to bring everybody back. They bring everybody back. The animation is not as good. The stories are not as good. The characters are not as good. They basically ruined the entire show. And I watched, I think, half of the first season when they brought it back. I'm like, I can't do this. This is horrible. It's ruining everything for me. It's garbage. Okay. They bring everybody back, and the show is better than it was. The animation is better. The storytelling, the way that they finish off the story with Ahsoka defeating Darth Maul, and then surviving Order 66 and rescuing Rex and going into exile, and then the one of the final scenes, one of the final shots of the entire show, and it's very sad, but it also brings everything together. One of the final shots of the entire show is Anakin as Darth Vader. It's Darth Vader shows up to the crash site of this gigantic cruiser and finds one of Ahsoka's lightsabers, and he thinks that she is dead. He thinks that she is dead. That's the final. He doesn't say anything. That's just like the final scene, and it's like the perfect send off for this amazing, amazing show. Again, there is never. I think creatively, it's one of the best. They really did something impossible by trying to formulate all of these characters and all these stories around characters that have been already established. And the fact that they were able to do it in the first place, but then to bring everybody back and finish it off even better. Animation is great. I mean, the final couple episodes is just awesome. And so if you're a fan of the Clone Wars, you probably should go watch Rebels. I'm not a huge fan of Rebels. The animation isn't as good, but it does add to the story, which is kind of interesting. But that is my review of Star Wars: The Clone Wars. If you have not seen it, watch episodes 1 and 2, watch The Phantom Menace, watch Attack of the Clones, then watch The Clone Wars because it takes place in between episode 2 and 3, and then you can just go through the rest of the movies and you will understand a lot more. I was trying to explain to somebody the other day. They were saying that they wanted to watch the Clone Wars, and I was like, "Well, start off with the live action movies first, because you'll watch the live action movies and you'll have some questions, like there'll be some gaps in knowledge. But then when you go back and watch the Clone Wars, knowing what you know about the live action movies, you're like, oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense, right? You get some of that backstory there." So, Star Wars: The Clone Wars, my favorite animated show of all time, one of the greatest animated shows of all time. There's never been there's never been a piece of secondary media in the history of movies and TV that has added more to the original established universe, the Star Wars: The Clone Wars, and it is a must watch. If you're a fan of sci-fi, if you're a fan of Star Wars, it is a must watch, 100%.